Hi everybody, welcome back to Coffee Culture Around the World from Sagebrush Coffee. Last lesson we talked about Italian coffee culture and the creation of espresso. Today we'll explore coffee's introduction and its impact on the rest of Europe. Starting with France, coffee was brought to Marseille by merchants in the early to mid 1600s and really began to become popular in 1657 when Sultan Mehmed IV visited King Louis XIV in Versailles. The Sultan had brought coffee beans to the king and introduced him to authentic Turkish coffee. The King of France, like Italy's Catholic Pope, loved it and the drink rapidly gained popularity in his land. The French created their own twist on coffee houses by creating the café. Cafes were similar to coffee houses but also tended to offer a full menu of food and alcoholic beverages. These cafes began to boom in popularity, especially in Paris. Fast forward about 100 years and Parisian cafes became popular meeting places for Republicans during the French Revolution. One particular place, Café des Foy, even hosted the call to arms for the storming of Bastille. After the Revolution, these French cafes became hubs for thinkers and creators during the remainder of the Enlightenment, and they continued to spark creativity well after the Enlightenment as well. In the early 1900s, writers like Ernest Hemingway and F. Scott Fitzgerald met at cafes like La Rotonde. Moving on to Spain, just like Italy and France, coffee was introduced to Spain by merchants around the 1600s. However, the first Spanish cafe didn't actually open until 1764. This cafe was opened in Madrid by the Gapini brothers, who were originally actually from Italy. Spanish ships were responsible for bringing coffee to other corners of the world as well. During the later part of the Spanish colonization period, coffee was brought to North, Central, and South America, as well as the Philippines and North Africa. Spain was not alone in these efforts, as France and Portugal were also trying to colonize similar areas and brought coffee with them as well. We will talk more about the effects that the colonization had on these parts of the world in later lessons. When espresso made its way to Spain, the Spanish put their own twist on some of the classic espresso drinks. They began serving cappuccinos with cocoa powder on top, and they also created the Café Bonbon, which literally translates to candy coffee and is a dessert drink made out of sweetened condensed milk and espresso. Although it isn't talked about as much as Italy and France, Spain also has a rich coffee culture. By the early 2000s, the FEC, or Federación Española del Café, claimed that the average Spaniard drank 600 cups of coffee per year. Now let's head over to England. The first coffee house in London was opened in 1652 by Pascal Rosé. This sparked a revolution in London society, which at the time was very hierarchical. People of different statuses sitting together and enjoying the same drink in the same place was practically unheard of. Communal tables were set inside of these cafes and covered in newspapers and pamphlets. Patrons could come in and read, discuss, and even write news. Although these venues were considered coffee houses and did serve coffee, they also served tea, which was the drink of choice for the English. King Charles II became paranoid about these news hubs and their ability to spread false news. He had his Secretary of State, Sir Joseph Williamson, send out a network of spies to coffee houses in London at the end of 1675. The king then ordered all coffee houses in London to close, but this ban only lasted 11 days before the people overturned and returned to their beloved coffee houses. The open discussion that picked up after the overturning of the ban led to a number of ideas during the Enlightenment. Coffee houses began to be referred to as penny universities, where you could come in and pay 1 penny for a drink and learn from intellectual discussion and debate. This idea is very similar to the school of knowledge idea that we learned about in the Ottoman Empire. Each of these penny universities targeted a specific audience. One place, called the Grecian Coffee House, catered towards the high society members like the Whigs and royalty. Isaac Newton was a regular patron here. Will's Coffee House became a literary hub with regulars such as John Dryden and Alexander Pope. Lloyd's Coffee House was the regular meeting spot for sailors and merchants, and Jonathan's Coffee House was a favorite amongst businessmen and stockbrokers. It eventually became the birthplace to the London Stock Exchange. Moving back east, let's take a look at Greece. Greece was actually part of the Ottoman Empire for almost 400 years, and that being said, traditional Greek coffee is essentially Turkish coffee with a pseudonym. This alternative name is used for the traditional kettle-brewed beverage in Greece itself as well as the majority of Cyprus. Greece was one of the first countries to get its hand on espresso after its invention in Italy. They copied traditional Italian drinks but also invented one of their own, known as espresso freddo. In this drink, espresso is whisked with the desired amount of sugar or stevia and then poured over ice and topped with affogato, a Greek milk-based foam. Another notable country in Europe's coffee culture is Malta, which is one of my personal favorites. Coffee was introduced to Malta during the Ottoman Empire's failed attempt to invade their island. After this rather forceful introduction, Turkish coffee became a popular drink, and over the next 100 years or so, Malta joined its European companions in opening coffee houses and making its own adaptations on the traditional drink. Maltese coffee, or café maillard, is spiced coffee cooked in a pot called a stangiata for an hour to an hour and a half. Maltese coffee is usually purchased already ground and mixed with spices in burlap bags at Maltese markets and grocery stores. Common spices include chicory, clove, and aniseed. When I was in Malta earlier this year, I picked up this bag from a market on the island of Gozo. European coffee culture is so extensive that I could probably dedicate my entire life to researching it and writing books about it. Historians are constantly finding new records on transactions and scandals that follow the movement of coffee throughout the continent and eventually the rest of the world. But for the sake of this lesson, we're going to stop here and move beyond Europe. Next lesson, we're heading south to talk about coffee culture in Africa. Make sure to tune in for this exciting lesson and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Until then, I'm Kourtney, and I'll see you next time.